It would be reasonable to think that the environment is the source of differences in cognitive skills, that we are what we learn. It is clear, for example, that human beings are not born with a full vocabulary. They have to learn words. Hence, learning must be the mechanism by which differences in vocabulary arise among individuals. And differences in experience, say, in the extent to which parents model and encourage vocabulary skills or in the quality of language training provided by schools, must be responsible for individual differences in learning. Earlier in this century, psychology was in fact dominated by environmental explanations for variance in cognitive abilities. More recently, however, most psychologists have begun to embrace a more balanced view, one in which nature and nurture interact in cognitive development. During the past few decades, studies in genetics have pointed to a substantial role for heredity in molding the components of intellect, and researchers have even begun to track down the genes involved in cognitive function. These findings do not refute the notion that environmental factors shape the learning process. Instead, they suggest that differences in people's genes affect how easily they learn. The extraordinary flying ability of dandelion seeds is possible thanks to a form of flight that has not been seen before in nature, research has revealed. The discovery, which confirms the common plant among the natural world's best flyers, shows that movement of air around and within its parachute-shaped bundle of bristles enables seeds to travel great distances, often a kilometer or more, kept afloat entirely by wind power. Researchers from the University of Edinburgh carried out experiments to better understand why dandelion seeds fly so well, despite their parachute structure being largely made up of empty space. Their study revealed that a ring-shaped air bubble forms as air moves through the bristles, enhancing the drag that slows each seed's descent to the ground. This newly found form of air bubble, which the scientists have named the separated vortex ring, is physically detached from the bristles and is stabilized by air flowing through it. The amount of air flowing through, which is critical for keeping the bubble stable and directly above the seed in flight, is precisely controlled by the spacing of the bristles. This flight mechanism of the bristly parachute underpins the seed's steady flight. It is 4 times more efficient than what is possible with conventional parachute design, according to the research. Researchers suggest that the dandelion's porous parachute might inspire the development of small-scale drone. We can't see it, but brains hum with electrical activity. Brain waves created by the coordinated firing of huge collections of nerve cells pinball around the brain. The waves can ricochet from the front of the brain to the back, or from deep structures all the way to the scalp and then back again. Called neuronal oscillations, these signals are known to accompany certain mental states. Quiet alpha waves ripple soothingly across the brains of meditating monks. Beta waves rise and fall during intense conversational turns. Fast gamma waves accompany sharp insights. Sluggish delta rhythms lull deep sleepers, while dreamers shift into slightly quicker theta rhythms. Researchers have long argued over whether these waves have purposes, and what those purposes might be. Some scientists see waves as inevitable but useless byproducts of the signals that really matter, messages sent by individual nerve cells. Waves are simply a consequence of collective neural behavior, and nothing more, that view holds. But a growing body of evidence suggests just the opposite. Instead of byproducts of important signals, brainwaves are key to how the brain operates, routing information among far-flung brain regions that need to work together. Mitz Miller is among the neuroscientists amassing evidence that waves are an essential part of how the brain operates.
The Bridgeport, Our Common Future, 1987, defines sustainable development as development which meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Implicit in this definition is the idea that the old pattern of development could not be sustained. Is this true? Development in the past was driven by growth and innovation. It led to new technologies and huge improvements in living standards. To assume that we know what the circumstances or needs of future generations will be is mistaken and inevitably leads to the debilitating sense that we are living on borrowed time. Only if we assume that society will remain static can we understand the needs of the future. The way we live today could not have been predicted 20 years ago. The sustainability paradigm fails to recognize this. It is a static view and thus places limits on human ingenuity. Similarly, a whole host of false assumptions dominate environmental thought. The scale of problems is exaggerated, the amount of resources is underestimated, and spurious links are made between areas such as green policies and profit, poverty and environmental degradation. Those of us who want a better future need to question these assumptions.
Is the purpose of history to promote a strong national identity and support national myths? Certainly, it has been used in this way for centuries, and this is often reflected in the history curriculum. We can all remember history at school as being a matter of learning lots of facts and dates, and long lists of kings and queens, a grand narrative of how we got from a not-so-civilized past to the great nation we are today. Putting aside the fact that national identity is a complex and divisive question, especially in countries like the UK, which is comprised of several nationalities, this approach to history emphasizes a broad understanding, rather than a detailed understanding. Yet history is, or should be, a critical, skeptical discipline. Some historians see their work as disproving myths, demolishing orthodoxies, and exposing politically motivated narratives which claim to be objective. What students need to develop are more critical and analytical skills, in other words, to think for themselves. They can do this by studying certain historical problems in depth. This involves being critical of the narratives presented by historians and skeptical of the myths preserved in the national memory.
The area that is now South Africa has been inhabited by humans for millennia. The San, the original inhabitants of this land, were migratory people who lived in small groups of about 15 to 20 people. They survived by fishing and hunting and by gathering roots and other wild foods. They did not build permanent dwellings but used rock shelters as temporary dwellings. Around 2,000 years ago, Khoikhoi pastoralists migrated to the coast. In the eastern part of present-day South Africa, iron-working societies date from about 300 AD. The Botswana and Nguni peoples arrived in this region around 200 AD. They lived by agriculture and stock farming, mined gold, copper and tin and hunted for ivory and built stone-walled towns. Over the centuries, these societies had diverse contacts with the Khoisan. Strife between the San and the Khoikhoi developed over competition for game. Eventually the Khoikhoi became dominant. These peoples lived in the western part of present-day South Africa and are known collectively as the Khoisan.